Ron's going to lead our minds in the opening prayer. Will you bow with him at this time?
Pray with me. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this beautiful Lord's Day that you've given us, gathered together to study thy word. We ask that you bless the teachers that have been willing to step up. May they have a ready recollection of the things that they have studied to bring forth to our learning, that we may have a better understanding of what is expected of us. Be with us now as we go through these classes. May we be attentive, use the things that we learn in thy service. We ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ron. I was just thinking of the weather. Like yesterday, it was like total sauna. In Toledo, it was so hot. And today, it's absolutely gorgeous. What a change. All right, we're in Genesis chapter 12. And we were discussing Abraham when he went on his trip down to Egypt. And we began a discussion concerning something Abraham said to protect himself. And was the fact that he told his wife Sarah, or Sarai, to tell everyone that she was his sister. Because he was afraid of what?
That they would take her and kill him.
Yeah, take her and kill him. Do you think the kings were capable of doing stuff like that back then?
Absolutely.
We're going to read a story where even Israelite kings would do that. So, yeah, they certainly would do stuff like that back then. And the story goes to, we were talking about, was Abraham guilty of lying or calling it a half-truth? Why doesn't God rebuke him for lying or telling a half-truth? We began a discussion last week of a couple of individuals in the New Testament, or Old Testament, that clearly said something that was not true, and God actually rewarded them for it. With the midwives with Pharaoh, how they lied back to Pharaoh, and we looked at the story of Rahab, how she lied to protect the spies. They were both praised for their actions in preserving life and not doing something they were told to do, and then they even lied about it to protect the individuals. We looked at an instance where God caused a lying spirit to lie to Ahab, and it was because Ahab wanted a lie. It wasn't because he wanted the truth. And even when he finally did hear the truth, he still went ahead and did what the lying prophets did, because that's what he wanted to hear. He had no interest in what God's opinion was, so God gave him exactly what he wanted, the lie. And he took it, and it ended up going to his death as a result of it. So when we look in chapter 12, Pharaoh of Egypt, because he's in Egypt now because of a famine, and Pharaoh's officials see that Sarah's a beautiful woman. They take her to Pharaoh, and let's look at the result of that too. How does God react to the taking of Sarah from Abraham? In verse 17, but the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abraham. "What have you done to me?" he said. "Why did you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she was my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. So in this particular instance, Abram mentioned that his wife Sarai was his sister. Does Abram get punished for lying?
No.
Kind of, because isn't there a famine at this time? So he's leaving Egypt where the food is.
Yeah, the famine was for a big area.
Right.
We're not sure the reason for the famine, but we're just talking about the taking
Egypt.
of Sarai for his wife, was he punished?
No.
No,
Who was punished?
Pharaoh.
the king.
Wait a minute. Why is Pharaoh punished? Does that seem illogical for God to do that?
Yeah, because he needed to get Abraham out of Egypt
He did.
and back to where he was supposed to be.
I know. There, like this verse, and there's a few other verses we're going to look at too, can make you scratch your head a little bit and try to think, what is going on with God? What's going on with Abraham?
I don't think Pharaoh would have willingly let them go had he not been afflicted with something.
Oh, he wasn't that kind of a guy,
He
huh?
wasn't that kind of guy. So he realized that, you know what, I did something wrong, or this woman has caused something bad to happen to me. Get her out of my sight. Just go.
And do we have any idea what happened to Pharaoh and his family that God cursed him? Any idea what the curse might be?
Great plagues. So,
Yeah, there was a plague
yeah.
to his family. And we'll read about another plague that happened later
Did
on.
they make the women barren or something?
Well, we're gonna look at chapter 20
That's a
of
different-
Genesis. I don't normally like to jump ahead and look at a chapter later on in Genesis, because we're gonna get to there sooner or later, but there's another story extremely similar to this one, where there's a little bit more detail added to some of the story, but he certainly punishes Pharaoh in this particular spot, and says what to Abraham? Don't do that again.
No.
He doesn't say that, does he? Now, that doesn't mean God wasn't thinking it. I'm not saying that. Well, maybe through some other verses, we can look at and think, maybe what was God thinking? So turn over to Genesis chapter 20. And we can read this particular story. I'm trying to think which verse I want to go to first. I got two chapters I want to look at. I'm trying to think which one's the best way to go to. Tell you what, hold your finger here. Turn over to 1 Samuel 16. These are very similar stories. I'm not sure which one's the best one to tell first. 1 Samuel 16. Okay, chapter 16 of 1 Samuel talks the story about Samuel when he anoints David as king over Israel. David is a young boy at this time. He's probably between 10 and 15 years old, somewhere in that range, they think. God comes to Samuel in 15 and says, Samuel, why do you keep mourning over King Saul? Because you know, basically, I've rejected him as king. So the dialogue begins in chapter 16, verse 1, where the Lord says to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. But Samuel said, how can I go? Saul will hear about it and will kill me. The Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, do you come in peace? Samuel replied, yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And it goes through the process here in the next few verses where Samuel is looking at the sons of Jesse and trying to determine which son God has chosen to be the next king over Israel to replace Saul. And he makes that famous remark too, that God looks at the heart, not at the appearance of individuals. Then verse 12 begins, he says, so he sent and had him brought in. This is David. He was ruddy, with a fine appearance and handsome features. The Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. He is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Samuel went on to Ramah at that point. So, what is Samuel concerned about when God tells him to anoint a new king? Samuel's worried about something. What's he worried about?
The old king's gonna kill me.
Yes, he's afraid Saul was going to kill him. Did Saul have that kind of a reputation? Oh yeah. What did he do to the priests when they thought they aided David later on? He killed them. There's like 70 priests. He murdered them all. He was famous for killing anybody that got in his way, and just about everybody was afraid of him because he most certainly had a murderous temperament. So Samuel's worried about that. He goes, "Man, if Saul finds out, I'm a dead man." And there's other stories in the Bible where people are afraid of prophets who are afraid of kings, because if they find out what they're doing, they're going to get killed. So God says, "I have a solution." What does he tell Samuel to say?
He's going to sacrifice to the Lord.
Yeah, he's telling them we're going to have a sacrifice. And we're going to consecrate ourselves, and we're going to have an event where we have a sacrifice, basically, to the Lord. Is that really why he's going there? No, it's not. That is an afterthought reason for going to Bethlehem to anoint David. What is the real reason they're going?
To anoint the new king.
To anoint the new king. It is not to have a sacrifice. So then why does he say we're going to have a sacrifice? Why doesn't he just tell the people in Bethlehem, "Hey, we're here to anoint the new king"?
He wants them all to show up.
What?
I said he wants them all to show up.
Well, he does. Well, why didn't he just tell them the real reason he's
He
there?
doesn't want to be killed.
Why would he get killed? Would the word get back to Saul?
Yes.
Oh, yes, it would.
It's like being blasphemous, really, or treason. Maybe it would have been looked at the time. This gives them the opportunity to align all of this without being under any suspicion.
Yeah. By Samuel going and having a sacrifice at Bethlehem, is that something Saul would be concerned about? Absolutely not. That was his job as a prophet and priest. His job was to do stuff like that in different regions. So is he telling him really to tell the people of Bethlehem a false reason why he's there, in essence? Is that really why he's there? No. He's there to anoint the new king. Now, through the dialogue, when you read it too, also, does the Lord or Samuel speak out loud and say, when the sons of Jesse come before him, and he's rejecting certain ones and finally accepts David, do the people there know what they're doing? Does God or Samuel vocally say, this one's rejected, this one's rejected, this one's accepted? No. It's done in silence. You can see the Lord is talking directly to Samuel and telling him which one he's going to pick. So nobody there really knows the reason why they're really there. So, is Samuel, through God, lying about the reason they're there?
Yeah, it's a half truth.
He's deceiving.
Or, yeah, it's a deception. But
Yeah.
it's to accomplish the Lord's work.
So you could lie to accomplish the Lord's
It's
work?
to preserve his life, so that he.
Preserve his life. Yeah, we need to talk about how we define some of these terms. Is the word half-truth anywhere in the Bible or anywhere in Scripture?
No.
You gotta be careful about that. Peter, did you have your hand up?
Well, this seems to be something between Samuel and God anyway, and not between Samuel and whoever else is there.
Yeah.
David doesn't actually become king till many years later.
Yes, that is true. Quite a few years later, actually.
And they were going to have a sacrifice, so he just didn't tell them the whole story.
No, he didn't. He told
So he
them,
only told them the part that was important, that
Yeah.
they were gonna have a sacrifice.
They actually created a narrative to make it look like they're doing one thing, when in fact, they were there for a very different reason. That is the real reason they were there, is to anoint David. So we have to look at these incidents and realize, first off, the term half-truth is not in the Bible. We're gonna talk about how to define some of these terms, because I think it's interesting. This term half-truth is not used in the scriptures. Define what a half-truth is. It's something we use in our culture and time quite a bit. What is a half-truth?
Well, the end of it, that it's used for deception, right? Withholding truth, we will often call a half-truth.
We will often do that. Now, let me ask you this. Can a half-truth be totally true?
Yes,
Yes.
half of it. It just leaves out parts.
Yes, it leaves out certain things. Can a half-truth be totally true and not have the intention to deframe or defraud somebody? Can you tell a half-truth with the intention of not hurting anyone or deceiving anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
That seems like the only reason to do it.
Yeah, it can be.
It just seems like you're either trying to deceive them, trying not to hurt their feelings, trying to keep yourself out of trouble. There's always a motive involved.
There is. This is more complicated sometimes than we really think about. Can a half-truth be intended to hurt, cheat, defraud someone?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, it can be used for that purpose. Was David, or was Samuel's intent to tell this story and have another event hide the fact, was it intended to defraud or hurt somebody? No. It wasn't.
It was to hurt Saul.
Not so much hurt Saul. Saul has already been rejected.
I know, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's replacing.
He would look at it that way, wouldn't he?
Saul would.
It seems like it's just to keep himself out of trouble.
It
He
can be.
needed to accomplish this, but if he was imprisoned or killed, it wouldn't get done. So really God's orchestrating this whole thing.
Wasn't it God's idea?
Yes.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. Anybody here in this room have some secrets that they don't tell anybody?
No.
There may be secrets between husbands and wives that they don't even share. The things that we don't tell other people. Can you say something to somebody and they make an assumption about something you're saying and be completely wrong about it?
Yeah, sure. All the time.
Yeah, all the time. We often make incorrect assumptions about people. We all have secrets that very few people, if any, know, and often it's not everyone's business to know our secrets, is it? We all fear people who don't love us, or even sometimes those who do love us may misuse sensitive information about us. Is that not true? You bet it is. Peter, you had your hand up before I make this next statement. Go ahead.
Well, in this particular case with Samuel, no one gets harmed at all. In the case with Abraham and with Pharaoh, Pharaoh does get harmed. But in that case, I think God was teaching Pharaoh something about Abraham.
Yeah.
So that's why that happened for a different reason.
I want to make a statement here too, using this story, and say Abraham did not tell a lie about Sarah. The two kings that we're going to talk about, we're going to look at another king here too. Look in Genesis chapter 20, Genesis chapter 20. I'm going to make this a statement before we read it. Abraham did not tell a lie. The two kings assumed Sarah was eligible to be married, and they took her without Abraham's permission or her permission by force. You need to think about the whole circumstances that surrounded this. When these kings wanted a wife, who was going to stop them?
There was no courtship. They didn't ask.
Did they love her? Why do these kings take certain women that they want?
Because they're beautiful.
They're beautiful. Sarah, check that box.
Yeah.
Alliances.
Alliances. That's political, isn't it?
Yep.
Is that to Sarah's benefit at all, really? Not really, not a lot. I mean, her people might be safer as a result of alliance, but her personally, you can read the stories throughout the ages where women are taken in marriage without their permission whatsoever, without their say-so whatsoever, without their families say so. They are just taken.
It's happened all the time, up until the last 100 years, really.
Very much true. So, let's look at another story now. Abraham lied to Pharaoh. Let's look at chapter 20 of Genesis now. Another story where, let's see, did Abraham lie here too? Or is this another way of looking at what he said? Chapter 20. Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived there near Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gegar. There Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gegar, sent for Sarah and took her. I maybe I should have said proposed to her. Yeah. He took her. When he showed up as a king, what do you think would happen if Abraham said, "No, you're not taking her"?
Bye, would have been
They
dead.
would have been killed.
Could
have been.
And I doubt that they showed up without any force with them. I'm sure soldiers were there with them, saying, "We have come to collect Sarah. The king wants her." Verse 3, but God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't she also say he is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Now notice, was Sarah involved in this deception? I don't even know if I want to call it a deception, but is she involved in the story?
Yeah.
Certainly, because he questions her too. What's the reaction from God of his taking Sarah? Even though he didn't know she was married. What does God say to Abimelech? "You're a dead man." And I'm sure Abimelech was like, "What? What did I do? What's going on? What are you mad at me for?" All right, so verse 6. Then God said to him in a dream, and I find this fascinating. "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die." So, what is interesting about this dialogue here? I think this is very interesting. What is God saying here? Does God know that he did this with a clear conscience? Absolutely. He had no idea. What does God prevent Abimelech from doing? Sinning or taking her in a conjugal way so that she would now be his wife. God stopped Abimelech from doing that. That's interesting, that he would prevent him from sinning because he did it with a clear conscience. So, in some respects, that's quite a benefit from Abimelech, although I'm sure he's very shocked and surprised at this dialogue. So once again, who is God upset with? Abraham or Abimelech? No sign of anything else. So finally, they resolved the matter a little bit further, and he asked him in verse 11, why you did, what was your reason for doing this? Verse 11, Abraham said, I said to myself, there surely is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. And besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not my mother, and she became my wife. So did he tell the truth?
Yeah.
Yes. Is there any lie in anything he said, Abraham? Did he tell a falsehood at all? Verbally? No, the only thing verbally he said
He just didn't tell the whole truth.
was truth.
He just don't.
Why did Abimelech assume that Sarah was a free woman? Because he had to assume that.
Yeah, right
He
there.
didn't say that he was
Because Abraham would say, she's my sister, but she's also my wife.
Did Abimelech ask any of these questions when he came to collect Sarah? Hey, Sarah, do you want to get married to me? Hey, Sarah, do you love me? Are you attracted to me? Hey, Abraham, do you mind if I take your sister right now?
No,
Does he ask any of those questions?
he just takes her.
He just takes her. So, Abraham's concern about Abimelech's behavior and his morals, is it justified? Absolutely. So Abimelech doesn't argue with him about it. Matter of fact, in verse 15, Pharaoh mentioned earlier on, he told Abraham, get out of the country. Abimelech says, you can stay. He doesn't kick him out of the country, which is interesting, I think. Then in verse 17, then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his slave girls so they could have children again. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife Sarah. So, if Abraham was a sinner for lying, is God going to listen to his prayers to heal other people? Does that seem like that's the kind of thing God does? Not really. I mean, he declares him as his prophet, and he says prayers for Abimelech, and God answers the prayer.
I look at it as though God allows this to happen because he knows the heart of man is evil. And in order for Abram to have his life preserved, he was okay with him going along with this charade. So it's going to preserve his life and further what he wanted, the plan that he had for Abram.
Yeah. Does he punish Sarah? Because she's involved in this whole scenario too. What does it say in the next verse, chapter 21? Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord for Sarah did what he had promised. So she has a child. God is gracious towards Sarah. That's not the line you would think if God was upset with him. It doesn't seem to match the dialogue.
Yeah, there's something going on here, quite, it's hard to figure out that God didn't prevent Abimelech from taking her in the first place. He prevented him from having conjugal rights with her, but he didn't prevent him from taking her. So there's something going on between the relationship between God is showing Abimelech, even though Abraham isn't quite telling the truth, he's my person, he belongs to me. I think that's what is happening.
That could be certainly part of it. And you could also make the statement, well, where's Abraham's faith? Why didn't he trust God and just say exactly what Sarah was to him? Why does he not say anything as far as the truth is concerned? If it's really his wife, does Abraham not trust God to take care of him? So the question is an interesting question. Both kings were clearly evil men. Like Saul, they were capable to kill to get whatever they wanted. God doesn't correct Abraham's statements to the kings about Sarah. Abraham said what he thought to at the moment to avoid death. God fixed both situations as Abraham probably thought he would. God loved Abraham as his son, not like he felt about the two kings. life and death situations. If they come, this shows us how strong God can be towards those he really loves. And we have to consider this sometimes because just like with our own children, if some neighborhood kids come up and say, hey, your kid did this and this and this, what's your tendency? Who are you usually going to side with? At least initially. Your own kids, because you love them. And especially if you know your child is not prone to do stuff like that. If he's a good kid. And somebody says he did this rotten, da 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 da, your first instinct, because you know the child well, is to defend the child. And I think that in many instances, this is kind of what God is doing here too. Abraham was his beloved son in many respects, and he wants to protect him. So, Peter, then Wayne.
Yeah, there's definite progression we see through the whole thing with Abraham's faith. We see it, we say it gets stronger, but I don't think it does. I think what happens is Abraham starts to understand more about the object of his faith, who is God. And the more he understands about God, the greater the faith becomes.
Yes.
He's not a great faithful man, he just starts to understand.
When you look at the story later on, when Abraham is told by God to sacrifice Isaac, to kill his son, does Abraham say, no, Lord, I can't do that?
No, didn't even think about it. He goes to do it.
And in the book of Hebrews, chapters 11, and this is 2,000 years later, God tells us what Abraham was thinking at the moment when God took him up to Mount Moriah and had him offer him up as a sacrifice. What was going through Abraham's mind in chapter 11 of Hebrews?
You gave me one son, I can give me another one.
Well-
Or save him or something.
Oh, it was along those lines. He thought that God could raise Isaac back up again from the grave. That was his thinking. He's thinking, if he makes me do this, he's not going to take Isaac from me forever.
Yeah,
What kind of trust does that tell you that Abraham had for God by him thinking that? That's absolute faith and trust. And that's why he is given so much credit throughout history for having such incredible faith that even when in a situation like that, he reasoned that God would protect him. And I think in all these cases with these kings here, I think Abraham, being the man that he was, trusted God implicitly. He did what he had to do at the moment because it was life and death situations. But as he learned throughout time and time again, that God took care of him.
Yeah, this is just what I don't think Abraham's trust got any bigger. What I believe happens is your understanding of who you trust changes and what God can do. Because at the end, what we're saying, he's believing God can raise someone from the dead. He's believing in the resurrection,
Yep.
which is exactly what we believe. And it's the object of our faith that's important, not how much faith we have. Does that make sense?
Yes. I wanted to read,
Jeff, I just had a quick point.
sure.
I think, if you think about it too, him going through dealing with Pharaoh and this other king, that had to have increased his faith too. Because he dealt with some of the greatest, those were probably two of the greatest kings of that time. And he went right into them and did some wrong things and still came out on the good side. So I would think that would help your faith. The other point I was gonna say is I think some of this too, we don't know, you know, if he would have just went into these places and God wiped out the Pharaoh or whatever for doing that, we don't know what implications that would have longer term on God's plan, because God had a plan through this whole thing. And all these nations came back in and played parts of that, things we don't even know. And so God had a plan all along that was being created. And so we can look at one situation, why did he do that? Well, I guarantee you there was probably somewhere 500 years later, 1,000 years later, where that might have came into play again. Who knows?
It did, actually. There's an instance where God mentions in 400 years, the Amorite sin was going to reach its full, where God didn't want to kill this nation or wipe them out using the Israelites because God was waiting till the nation had reached a point of utter evil that he couldn't tolerate it anymore, just like Sodom and Gomorrah, which is what we're going to get to very shortly. I want to read to you I already read one commentary that mentioned one thing from Kaufman's commentary, which, like I said last week, I love Kaufman's commentary, but sometimes he says some stuff that I don't always agree with. In this particular case, I didn't agree with what he said. This is a different commentary. It says, twice Abraham passed off his wife as his sister, once with the Egyptians in Genesis 12, and the other time with the people of Gegar in Genesis 20. Earlier, Abraham explained to Sarah that because she was so beautiful, they would kill him and by implication, marry her. Then later, Abraham explained to King Abimelech that he thought the fear of God was not in this place and they would kill me. He was afraid someone might take his wife by taking his life. Abraham had not lied. He told a truth to mislead them. Abraham instructed Sarah to say she was a sister was no different than God telling Samuel to intentionally mislead Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 16. This was not biblical lying as bearing false witness or telling an untruth for illegal gain. Abraham had no thought to defraud or cheat anyone. If he had lied, these leaders would not have let him get away with it. Furthermore, God did not call it a lie or even rebuke Abraham. Instead, God intervened by plaguing Pharaoh's house and warning Abimelech in a dream not to take Sarah to marry her. Yet, Abimelech addressed Abraham about the problem he caused, and he rebuked Sarah for going along with this ploy. There seems to be some sarcasm when he said to her, your brother. That's what Abimelech said. Lied to me, so I'm giving you 1,000 things. So this commentary kind of hits a little bit of what I say. Notice he says Abraham did not tell a lie. These two kings made assumptions. That's where the confusion comes in. So what does this tell us, all in all, by looking at these things? What does this tell us about who God is? When we look at stories like this, what does this tell us about who God is? Does it give us a deeper understanding of how God thinks?
He has an awful lot of patience with Abraham.
Yeah.
You know, love is patient, love is kind. All of that is happening with Abraham.
Does God look out for his children in ways that we can't possibly understand? In ways that we can't see or understand? Even when we do make mistakes, and I'm not saying Abraham made a mistake here. Even when we do make mistakes, if we are faithfully, to the best of our ability, trying to follow him, can he make our mistakes work for us in the long run?
All things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose.
Now, if you're evil and against God, can you use that scripture? Well, you're going to get the opposite, aren't you? Your sins will find you out.
Was that saying both of these incidents, free will was involved? Because if God had intervened and changed his heart, and changed the king's heart, and let Abram pass, there would have been no glory brought unto God. But because of his free will, and they were brought to understand that there is a God, that's more powerful than them changing, because it affects everybody around.
Yeah.
They understand it. Yeah, there is a God, and God is Abram's God. Yeah. And I think that makes it a much more powerful story.
Yeah. And like I told you when I first started this whole dialogue, I sometimes get annoyed at some of the commentaries because they just take such nasty pot shots at some of the greats in the Old Testament and assume they've done this evil thing when they don't know all the circumstances and they're not using all the scriptures that can pertain to this incident to make them realize maybe we really don't understand fully what's going on here, and maybe they didn't do what we thought they did. Peter.
Can we say too that there are things that happen in your life that God is starting to show himself to you in ways you don't expect.
Yeah.
And in deeper ways, it gets bigger and bigger as it goes along.
Yeah. That's true too. So, we got just a few more minutes. Go back to Genesis chapter, we're gonna go in chapter 13 now. And before I get too far into this dialogue here too, I have a few pictures right here. This particular picture is of the Jordan Valley. And you can see there's water down here. There's settlements down here. This is a modern day picture, obviously. And this is the Jordan Valley. Right here, you can see the heights of the hills and mountains that surround the Jordan Valley where this river runs. And this is running south towards the Dead Sea. And the headwaters of the Jordan River come from where? Sea of Galilee. There's a river that flows in the top northern part of the Sea of Galilee that flows into it also. So, and this is another hill we're standing on, or they're standing on, looking down over this region. So this is called the Jordan Valley. Sometimes it's called the Jordan Rift or the Rift Valley. When you get to the end of this, you get to Death Valley, and the Death Valley is the lowest point on the earth. It's 1,300 feet below sea level. There's tar pits down there. There's a huge crack in the earth here through this valley, underneath this valley that runs clear down into Africa. And it's the site where there's been many earthquakes throughout history because this crack is very extensive and very large. So that's partly what created the Jordan Valley. So I don't think, that's a picture of Sodom and Gomorrah. The next, I'm gonna hold off on those. We'll get to those later on. So chapter 13, verse 1. So Abraham went up from Egypt to the Negev, which means he went north, and he, with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abraham became very wealthy in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he probably got some of that from the Egyptian king too. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, which is north of Jerusalem, about 30 miles, to a place between Bethel and Ai. This is where he was at before, and where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abraham's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land at this time. So as they enter back into the land of Israel from the Negev, from Egypt, a problem develops between Abraham and Lot. What's the problem that develops?
Arguing over the herds are feeding.
Yeah, this wasn't.
The herd.
Yeah, this wasn't so much a problem earlier in their relationship. Yeah, that's it. They both their herds and flocks are enormous now. They're very wealthy, and if you got that many animals, what do those animals need? Food, water, everything. So as a result, Abraham had his herdsmen, Lot had his herdsmen who controlled his flocks, and what was happening between the two? Yeah, they were starting to argue. Now notice also too, this is kind of between the lines a little bit. It says the Canaanites in verse 7 and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. Were they free of danger by being in the land of Canaan? Abraham and Lot? No, there was kings there too. And what kind of people were these kind of people?
Evil.
Very evil. Would it be an advantageous situation if Abraham and Lot weren't getting along and cooperating with one another, how could that affect them with the natives of that land?
Divided they fall.
Yeah, divided they would fall. Abraham's saying, hey, we gotta stick together, we're family. We got a lot of enemies around us. By us not getting along, it can create a lot of problems for us in the long run. So, we're out of time now, we're gonna stop here. But it creates an interesting situation because eventually we're moving into the story of Sodom and Gomorrah before we get there, but some other things happen too. There's another war that comes up, which is why Abraham and Lot need to stick together. We'll find out very quickly that they needed to stick together because the kings of this land were not friendly. So we'll find that out next week. All right, we'll see you then.